Anyway, yeah, I just want to start this off by apologizing for postponing this for so long. Um, but I did manage to finally decide that it's the right time now. Um, Specifically, it's just I'm a kind of guy embroiled in a lot of drama. So I'm constantly dealing with people that I'm just totally hostile to, and I'm constantly dealing with like having to grow the stream and all that stuff. I am very glad to have you on and very glad to finally be able to talk. So, you want to
Well,
introduce yourself to the audience or
yeah, sure. Thank you for having me on. And no apology necessary. I'm just glad to, I'm glad to be able to talk to you. I mean, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to your viewers with a request, which is, I think, urgent, which is to uh, sincerely, thoroughly endorse the LaRouche policy to prevent a nuclear World War III and to develop the world. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to other people too, like my friend Caleb. And I've been working with the LaRouche movement for 10 years. And when I started working with LaRouche, he was saying when the assassination of Gaddafi happened that this was actually intended to target Russia, and that this was a move for World War III. And I thought he was insane, And then I ended up quitting my job and working with his organization. And now here we are, and it's pretty apparent that that's what the whole thing was, that he was right all along, and that his policy solution, which is the World Land Bridge, is the way to go. So that's why I'm here.
yeah, I personally 100% agree with the land bridge proposal. And I'm also interested in LaRouche's views about the difference between the British so-called free market laissez-faire system versus the American system, which is based on developmental investment banks. So one of the things that so first of all, I'm interested in your views on this. What are your views on the current state of American politics and political parties? Because I don't think the LaRouche movement is its own party. It's more like a interest, right? A pack.
Yeah, well, we're a philosophical association. We're trying to create a renaissance. We're trying to communicate certain scientific discoveries that Lyndon LaRouche made between 1948 and 1952, which made him the world's most accurate economic forecaster of the whole 20th century and still today. And the basic thing that we're saying about this political situation today is if you want to intervene effectively, you got to look from the top down. And that's what, electoral politics prevents you from doing in large part. So the top down question is that today, Tony Blinken announced that he gave written responses back to the Russians about the two proposals, or about one of the proposed treaties, and NATO did the same thing at the same time. And right after delivering this, he announced out loud that they're not at all going to go along with one of the required stipulations, which is an agreement to prevent NATO from extending into Ukraine. And then today you had like 27 Russian diplomats were expelled from the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. So, and everyone knows, probably he was listening, about the proposal to move troops into Ukraine, American troops. I think 50,000 is the number. So basically, the Russians have made extremely clear. Dmitry Polyansky was on our Schiller Institute broadcast of last Saturday, and he's the first deputy permanent representative of Russia to the UN. They made clear that they're on the brink. They're at the very edge. And that therefore, Putin said, you're at our doorstep, we can't do anything anymore. And that therefore they need security agreements, otherwise there will be military technical responses, which could include the emplacement of weapons in Belarus. It could include nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs being placed on submarines off the east coast of the United States, and other things as well. So if you're going to get out of this, then you need a flank, because the British Empire, which is trying to push this whole thing to World War III, because of the collapsing neoliberal economic system, they are in a weak position because of the fact that the Chinese are executing LaRouche's policy. They're building the Belt and Road Initiative. They have a physical economic capability, which is the same kind of thing that the United States did under Lincoln during the Civil War, using the policies of Henry Carey, like you're referring to the American system of economics. And right now, Helga LaRouche, as head of the Schiller Institute, is saying, you got to get the 4 big countries to work together on what she calls Operation Ibn Sina. That if you want to flank on this condition of geopolitical warfare, where there seems to be no solution, no possibility of working together, then you need to identify the thing that is out of the blue, but totally necessary, and that's to rescue Afghanistan. And not just to stop the mass genocide of the Afghans, because there's about 22 million people on the verge of starvation. 9 million people are very close to death from starvation in Afghanistan as a result of U.S. Freezing the Afghan central bank funds. And we've been working with former U.S. Surgeon General Jocelyn Elders, David Satcher as well, former U.S. Surgeon General, and an advisor to the Afghan central bank, to say it's time for U.S., Russia, China, India to work together to develop an advanced medical system in Afghanistan, advanced infrastructure, and basically expand the Belt and Road into Afghanistan. And so this is called Operation Ibn Sina, which is a reference to the great philosopher and hero of Afghanistan from the Islamic Renaissance of about 1000 AD. Because we want to revive a commitment to that kind of focus on the sacred quality of human life, and that if you could force the US and the British basically to give in to this kind of policy of development of Afghanistan, then you might be able to get nations to work together.
That's I see. Afghanistan has a very central place in geopolitics, so I understand how it's such an important part of any plan to unite the 4 major powers. But specifically concerning the United States right now, I am interested in third parties. I'm interested in starting a third party. And that's not just the Communist Party, which I think I see the third party as a popular front, right? Which would be composed of many different, diverse ideological character. I don't think that the 2-party system is any longer viable to realize any kind of change in this country. One of the problems we run into when it comes to third parties is the question of what are some platforms we could run on that are of immediate pressing significance, that have a right here and now significance. What do you think are the main issues that could appeal to ordinary Americans to run on?
Yeah. Okay, so my very good friend Diane Sayre is running for U.S. Senate in New York against Chuck Schumer.
That's on the Democratic ticket?
No, independent.
Oh.
You're right, we used to run as Democrats. But I ran as an independent when I ran for U.S. Senate in New Jersey. But what she's doing is she's actually going to the houses of the people who drowned in Ida. Because you remember in the Queens you had people who drowned in their basements during Hurricane Ida. And then people are talking about climate change being the cause of increased deaths when people are dying because the public housing in New York City is of such an abysmal quality. And you know about the fires in the Bronx, for example, recently. So what we're addressing that, which is the least, the conditions of the least among us, right? The forgotten man. You have to fight on that basis. But do it from the standpoint of forecasting. Because LaRouche said what you said, in the sense that he said 10 years ago that the political parties are completely done, that we're past the era of political parties. Either that or we're screwed for good. But his forecast is coming true about the financial economic crisis. And I think that that's what you have to communicate to everyone that you're talking to, is that there's a crash that is ongoing, that an hyperinflation that has been engineered by the central bankers. They set this up back in August of 2019 at the Jackson Hole Summit. And what they did is they got together and they said, we should have financial regime change. BlackRock put out a white paper that was very clear about this. What they're saying is that they want to not only have control over monetary policy, but also to have control over the budgets of nations. There should be no longer any economic sovereignty among nations. And the excuse that they give is net zero.
Yeah.
Right, and that has yet led to what we've seen over the past couple of years, which is enormous money printing beyond beyond anything before. We have a famine that is killing huge numbers of people, not just in Afghanistan, because of the breakdown of the economy that's being affected by the collapse of this system. And it's up to us to do the things that will actually do something about that, like Glass-Steagall, like national banking on the Hamiltonian policy, which is what the Chinese are doing, and then building up the public infrastructure that's actually going to make the difference. We have a new pamphlet we put out, which people can see on the LaRouche organization website, The Coming U.S. Economic Miracle on the New Silk Road. And what we're putting forward is, I think, something that, everyone who is looking at the world and looking at the collapse of the U.S. can support and fight for, which is how to actually build up the development corridors across the United States that would bring the United States economy to the same level of physical economic development that you have in China. So that's a program. That's what I see.
So, one of the other crises we're witnessing here is the question of, like, it's a kind of talking point. I don't know what your views on it are. I don't have any committed views. Not that. This talk of automation displacing jobs being outsourced overseas. Isn't there an element here of the need to restore U.S. manufacturing and these traditional types of physical jobs that were outsourced? And if these jobs are not, if there is a problem of traditional jobs, do you think that reducing the workday and universal income? What are your views on this, like, talk of the so-called fourth industrial revolution and the age of universal income? And is that necessarily tied to the Carl Schwab agenda of you will own nothing and be happy, the Great Reset?
I think that it is. The assertion that increasing levels of technology are going to reduce numbers of jobs is simply not true. The issue is, what are you using that for? What are you trying to commit yourself to? And LaRouche, if you read his economics, I can really recommend, we're going to do a class series soon on his entire economic system, his discoveries. But his point is that you have to lift up the energy flux density of your economy. You have to lift up the capability to support more and more people at a higher and higher standard of living in the same territory. And if you're going to do that, then automating, your abysmal food factories or whatever bullshit people think, manufacturing is in the United States today. I mean, there's only like 11 million manufacturing jobs in the U.S. today. It's collapsed massively since NAFTA was put in, and of course, since the 1960s, it's ridiculous. So, if we want to bring people in to a mission for humanity and a mission for the nation, I say you put them to work building, 30,000 miles of high-speed rail. So, and you build the nuclear power plants.
I understand this. Infrastructure is, like, clearly a very central piece, the primary central piece of any economic plan for economic renewal. But my only question, and it is just a question, is infrastructure facilitates specifically the flow of goods and people. My question is the flow of what goods and people for what purpose, right? Like at what point doesn't economies, for example, I can be speaking from ignorance, but um the standard of living comes from the fact that people are doing, they're having well-paying jobs, they're doing jobs that pay well, that make goods, make commodities that are sold on the market, right? And then infrastructure facilitates the flow of these goods and the flow of people. Also, the flow, if you look at it purely in economic terms, infrastructure merely facilitates the flow of people to purchase goods and services, right? Um, so I think the question is, it's an open question about like the importance of the side of the things that are being facilitated by infrastructure, and not just infrastructure itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I'll take it from LaRouche's approach. The the purpose of economic growth, LaRouche says, is not economic growth. That's not really the point. The point is that you want the creative individuals in your society to mature at a higher and higher creative potential. In other words, you want to give an increasing margin of your population an ability to live in such a way that they can contribute to humanity by making a unique discovery, for example, or by communicating the unique discoveries that have been made and allowing them to be adopted by a society. And that is the mission of economics. Economics is just making that happen. So it has nothing to do with money. People think that money is economics. It has nothing to do with it. It has the commitment that we're fighting for is to figure out what causes these successive leaps in capability of an economy. Like, for example, if you go back to the beginning of the United States, we were working completely off of wood, right? We're burning wood in order to run our economy. And we had something like 3,000 watts per capita people were using in a fire-based economy. It's 30 times greater than if you didn't have fire, right? If by the time you get to the 1920s, it's 5,000 watts. We're using coal. 1970, it's 10,000 watts. We're using oil, natural gas, and limited amounts of nuclear power. So today, we should be at like 40,000 watts per person if we had nuclear power. If we had that across the world, we'd have this increase of that capability.
Socialist US to pursue a
but today, in the world, the average is something like 2,400 watts per capita. It's the same as it was in the US at the founding 200 years ago, more than 200 years ago. This is economics from a LaRouche's standpoint.
I agree with you, but my question is more about the question of jobs. Like, there has always been standard forms of labor. As much as I agree 100% with you that as a humanist, as a Marxist even, Marx talked about how the goal is to unleash man's creative powers to pursue the aesthetic and scientific, the latent forms of creative, aesthetic, and scientific work that they're capable of, right? On their free time, basically. But nonetheless, there has persisted, and maybe if it will be erased in the future, today there is still the question of standardized forms of work that is not necessarily creative, but which is like a standard form of wage labor, basically. Or it's not wage labor, it's just some form of standardized labor in general, right? And my question is, what future do you see for that? Because in the United States, the standard form of labor has been, like in industry, right? Jobs that have been outsourced. So, what is the future for the types of job, or is maybe your argument basically that when we set the foundation for an energy and revolution that will lead to an economic renewal, the necessary basis, well, we don't have to worry about the types of jobs and forms of employment people have, because new forms of business and economic activity will flourish because of that. But that still leaves open the question of what will the standard form of labor be, or what is the standard form of labor in the 21st century?
I guess the way that I can answer that, if you imagine that what it used, I think to put it in context, you think about what the man said to his grandson when he brings him to the Hoover Dam and he says, "We built this for you." And people worked at the construction of this great infrastructure capability in the New Deal because they had a mission to make a better condition for the generations that come after. So anything that someone is doing that is connected to that kind of mission has a dignity. If you're a janitor at NASA, if you're running the maintenance of the facility at NASA's in terms of cleaning it and so forth, then you have a purpose. Whereas if you're mopping up the brothel, then you're doing something that is completely removed from the real economy and the mission.
I
You
agree
know,
with you. I agree with you. Do you think? No, I mean your point is well taken. I completely agree. Even if you're a janitor, and yes, as a matter of fact, I've have writings and research of my own where yes, I do agree. Like there is this unique significance of infrastructure as as being able to fulfill this like need for a dignified form of labor for the population, right? The drudge and toil of the 9 to 5 completely meaningless bullshit jobs of the service sector, right? But I still wonder if, well, let me ask you this: would you consider, with the level of technology we now have, would you consider manufacturing itself to be a form of infrastructure now? The kind of
so
individually labor intensive and repetitive work that's not
sure.
like part of the construction of a project necessarily, but the production of mass commodities.
So LaRouche says in that Leibniz is the first. He inaugurates the science of physical economy. And if you look at his first writing on it, which is just a few pages long, he talks about the dynamic in the factory that you want. And the dynamic you want is that people have a creative relationship to one another. They're solving problems. They're figuring out, how to become more knowledgeable about the principles behind the process that they're working through. And we don't have anything like that because we live in a satanic neoliberal economy. It makes no sense. Nothing that you do makes any sense in the United States anymore. Everything is completely upside down. The people who make the most money are the biggest swindlers and the cheaters. And then, every physical part of our economy is controlled by cartels, like the food cartels. So that's the sort of determining cultural characteristic of our system, and it's got to be shifted. You got to create the scenario where people have a human relationship to one another, even within whatever condition they are, like manufacturing. Whatever kind of job. I mean, especially, you might say, in that kind of situation.
Right, not to push back. It's kind of like a bad tendency I have because, to be
Sure.
very clear, I find this an extremely admirable vision that LaRouche movement has, and specifically like that the participation in the uh, the projects of human infrastructure and I guess in Marxist lingo, developing the forces of production. That this is can be the source of a newfound sense of human heroism and human creativity, dignity. I mean, there's a movie that China released, The Wandering Earth, which kind of reminds me of that, right? It's like life's prime want becomes participating in this kind of engine of human growth and innovation. Um, it's a very inspiring and compelling vision to me. But my pushback comes from this kind of devil's advocate, I guess. I don't know what I would call it, but the inner
Sure.
materialist within me says To me, I see this as like very lofty and heavenly, and that's why I admire it as good, right? It's lofty, it's heavenly, it puts our gaze toward the stars, if you will, right?
Yeah.
But I still think there is objectively just there is a reality of just toil and trudge of just standardized work that does not necessarily directly contribute to any type of noble cause or even any creative pursuit, but just like just necessary standardized labor. Like I think that's why manufacturing is an example of that. It's like in manufacturing, for example, the only time there's room for creativity is to change the very process of manufacturing itself. But between that, there is still the kind of pure, like let me put it in Marxist lingo, right? In Marxist lingo, in dialectics, there's the transformation from quantity to quality, right? And it seems to me that your vision focuses only on qualitative transformation. That's the creative process, basically, right? But what about the process between these of just pure quantitative uh, grudge and toil of just like, yeah, we need this much units of whatever, and there's just not a lot of room for creative input or just kind of do it mechanically. And you get what I'm saying? Like in ancient
Well, okay.
times, this would be like the peasant who has to toil the fields and look, there's not a lot of creativity. You grow the potato and you grow the not, maybe there can be innovation in how potatoes are grown, but until then you have to do the work of what you already know. Does that make sense?
I think it does, but what you're talking about is actually the need to fundamentally change the culture, to have a renaissance in the most beautiful ideas about the human individual. LaRouche's view of history is identical with Schiller, for example, which is that all of human history has been a fight between oligarchism and republicanism, or Zeus versus Prometheus. Because, anytime someone wants to halt technological scientific growth, it's for their own benefit. It's because they want to destroy the population. They want to kill people off. That's what the Great Reset is. It's a depopulation policy, and it's being done right now. It's killing large numbers of people. 47 million people now are in a stage of famine. And what we're looking towards is to create a society, a planetary culture is a phrase he uses in his book, Earth's Next 50 Years, in which you have a dialogue of civilizations, and we see that which is in the image of the Creator in every other human being on the planet. And you have that as a policy of governments. That's what we're saying needs to be done, which is not pie in the sky, because that's where nation states come from, is people who have that idea and said we need something based on the general welfare. So I hear what you're saying, that there seems to be some kind of, maybe this is too much, but I know that every human being has an immortal soul. And so I know that the lofty, the highest, the heavenly, is exactly what they deserve.
I completely agree. I mean, make no mistake. I would never. I don't believe there's some human beings that are condemned to do repetitive mechanical work. I just wonder to what extent all of us are, to some extent, condemned to do forms of work in our lives that are not necessarily inspiring. Of like, if that makes sense, like just not necessarily that it's degrading, but just that it's just work you do out of necessity. But I think that it's kind of a convoluted philosophical stripe, right?
Well, I have an answer to that. I'm going to try my best, okay? I think that I believe that necessity and freedom coincide
Yes,
in
yeah, of
humans,
course.
right? And that the crucial contribution of LaRouche to the idea of the science of economics is that he says this is the pathway to understand what's the necessary next scientific breakthrough, the next necessary philosophical discovery. And he points to this measure of increases in relative potential population density, that's a shadow of whether you're making sufficient creative progress, negentropic progress in your economy. And if you're doing that, then you can understand what needs to come next. So you can constantly make a progress towards a goal that is, that we'll never reach. We're never going to get to perfection, but we can always become more perfectible. Okay, and that seems to me to be the way that we should, reflect on our own nation and the purpose of it. I guess what I'm saying is keep bringing out the idea of the purpose. Keep bringing out the idea of how people can be lifted out of their senses and into a higher purpose.
I agree with that. Not to completely shift gears, well, that's kind of what I'm doing. LaRouche specifically was the first person who introduced me to the fact of that the British never left, basically. Always been trying to sabotage the Republic. To put this in terms that are more concrete to people, what do you think are examples of financial institutions and networks and organizations that represent that are like the basis of the British kind of control over our political and economic system?
Okay, so the first one is the 1971 breakdown of the Bretton Woods system.
Yeah.
That basically from 1944 to 1971, you had a fixed exchange rate system that was based on a gold reserve standard, and nations could make long-term agreements about how to collaborate. And you could say, well, I'm going to make a loan to you, Mexico, in dollars, and we know how many pesos you're going to pay to pay it back 5 years down the road, and we're going to use that loan to build, railroads in Mexico. And you can't do that under a system of a floating exchange rate, in which you have people like George Soros, who is he's just one of the crowd, right? But he's one of the errand boys for this system that attacks the currency of a nation like Mexico, causes it to collapse
He did that to Indonesia, right?
He did it to Indonesia. He also did it to Italy. In fact, it was reported that he was part of a group on Queen Elizabeth II's yacht who planned out how they were going to do that to Italy as part of bringing about the European Monetary Union. And this whole strategy has been to use money to control people. So people know about the IMF, they know about the World Bank, and these organizations which should be emitting long-term credit for increasing the capability of these nations to serve their populations. Instead, they use banker's arithmetic to cause you to be completely indebted. That's the debt trap, right? And LaRouche said in 1971, if this is allowed, you're going to have fascism, you're going to have World War III, and you're going to have mass population problems, including pandemics. So that's what I would point to. People should learn about the liberal system of economics.
So when it comes to the question of the British continued influence in the U.S., we know about the intelligence agencies and all that. I have made the prediction. I don't know how this has been received by you guys or if you've heard about it. Of they're going to try to field Meghan Markle to have a political future. What do you think about that? Do you think that it would ever get to a point that it's just very overtly they want to combine 1619 Project and the kind of political crisis facing the United States that's shaking the foundation of the Republic itself, and that their solution to resolve this is going to be some kind of royal family? Or what do you think?
Well, it looks like what you said is coming true, right? I mean, every indication is that they're being pushed that way, and you can't go to CVS without having the Queen's face looking at you. So that's a big part of it, I think. My impression is that there is, I I really don't know what to do in the United States other than, talk to you and the people like you, because there are people that we're reaching in the retired intelligence professionals. Like Ray McGovern does stuff with us. We're doing stuff with, like I said, retired public health officials. There are people who are willing to step forward right now against this collapse of the society, but the political situation is insane, and so the British monarchy is going to do whatever they want. That's what they did to. BreadTube, right? When they were the ones. Prince Charles is the one who was financing that person. So what is it that we're going to have to address? I think people have to understand this and shut it down. I think the fact that Prince Andrew is in the kind of heat that he's in is it's an effect of the collapse of the British imperial system. It is falling apart. There's no reason that anyone should give any credence to the financial predictions, to the military policy of these people. But we have to step into the phase right now where things are shifting, and we have to put forward a policy that would function. That's my view, because I look at it. I think that there's an increasing minority of young people who are inspired by the people in China, by the transformation of China, and if we can fight back against this, then what else are we going to do? It's the only way that we can possibly turn society around, is to get people to think about the world from this standpoint. That we're not going to put up with the British monarchy's depopulation policy anymore, and that we're going to work with Russia, we're going to work with China, we're going to work with other major nations, and we're going to lift people out of poverty. It's the only thing that can work.
What do you think about coming on a little regularly on the show, like maybe once a week, or that? I don't know. I can't right now make any guarantees, but I really enjoy your perspective, and I like the message you guys bring. And I probably don't agree with you guys on everything, but I think it's like a good. Personally, what I like about the LaRouche movement is the coherence of your vision, and that you just seem to like be correct on pretty much almost every like real thing that happens in the world. Which I'm not myself part of the LaRouche. I'm a Marxist-Leninist, but as someone who considers themselves a real Marxist-Leninist, I just find myself having the most common ground with you guys, right? So I do think it would be not good for us to work together and share our perspectives, exchange dialogue, and and work together about. This is probably important. It doesn't really sound necessarily like you have a specific political plan, like how to win the country and things like that. So it would be very good for us all to work together. You, the Rouge people, Caleb's movement, Center for Political Innovation, and others, to figure out how we can come together and just figure something out, whether that's a third party or whether that's something else. I think if we combine our forces, we could fight back in the way that you're talking about.
I'm really, really glad to hear you say that. I think the same way. I've been approaching the idea of. I've been working on the idea of building an anti-Malthusian alliance, and I'm really. That's exactly what I said to Caleb. I said, we got to talk regularly. Let's organize ourselves a little bit better. And if we educate the people who are coming to your stream and who are getting, talking to Caleb and talking to many other people, then you'll have an increasing margin of people in the country who are actually young and can do something about it. And I think that could be the shift. I think that could be the spark of optimism. It's not going to come from anyone older than 25. I'm going to try to shepherd a little bit if I can, help out, or midwife, but it's not going to come from anyone other than actual youth in the United States. And I have something for you. I don't know how now that it's 2 a.m. here, but I'm like totally wired, so I can stay on as long as you want. But
Unfortunately, I don't mean to cut it short, but I do have to go pretty soon. But
okay,
I
that's a good opportunity for me
yeah.
then to say what I'm going to say. I'm going to mail you this. Okay, this is the first volume of the Lyndon LaRouche collected works. Okay, we just released this. We're going to send another one out. We're going to publish another one in this year. And I would like to give you a subscription for free to Executive Intelligence Review and to our daily intelligence briefing. So that will come to you. You can just give me your email and I'll send it to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And then I would really love to continue talking. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. Go on.
We should talk more, and also when there's news and you want to share your perspective on global events and things like this. Yeah, I think we should be building more bridges and more connections and things like that, because the thing is that our enemy, the mainstream media and the Democratic Party and then BreadTube, and they have a network. They just, they have disagreements amongst each other, but they have this united front where they all work together. So we need to be doing the same thing. We need to have a network of resistance and opposition.
Yeah, I do. I mean, the thing is that we shouldn't be pessimistic at all. We've got Xi Jinping with us, and we've got Vladimir Putin, and we've got many other people across the world. And I'll say further that people in the rest of the world, especially Russia, have a very high regard for Mr. LaRouche, who was thrown in prison, completely unjustly, and they tried to destroy his movement by doing that. And we're still here. And if these policies and these ideas are discussed and more people are willing to discuss them openly today, then I think that people in other countries will get the message that maybe the United States has a future, because otherwise they look at us and they think we're fucking insane and that we're about to blow up the world, which is what we're going to do. So if more of this can come forward, then I think we can change things. And I invite you to, we're going to have a conference a joint conference with the Russian International Affairs Council sometime either this Saturday or next Saturday. And I definitely want to I'll let you know the information. You can hear about it. And you're welcome to get on and pose a question to the Russians from your standpoint, because that's the kind of thing that we should be doing, is, bringing you in as well.
I would appreciate that a lot. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I'd have to check for this Saturday. I think next Saturday, probably more guaranteed, but I also may be available this Saturday. But that sounds amazing. Yeah, I'd appreciate it. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to have you on, and I have read some of LaRouche's works, and even where I may disagree with him, there's no question about the fact that he was a deeply brilliant and very, very knowledgeable person. I really appreciate his world historical vision, that it just encompasses all of world history and is able to make sense and make connections between so many different things, right? And it's hard to contest Mr. LaRouche's discoveries that he makes, right, through history.
Yeah.
Like you research it independently and you realize, wait a second, these are real connections he's making. There is something going on with the Venetian banks and so on and so on. So, to be completely honest with you, before a few years ago, I was always under the impression that LaRouche was a cult and these people are crazy, and LaRouche was a crazy guy who believed in crazy things. And then a friend of mine recommended me some of LaRouche's works, and I actually sat down and read what he was saying for myself. And one of the most inspiring things I think I first derived from LaRouche, which kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I had a prior different conception, was what he wrote about the U.S. Civil War. And he basically was saying, to me, the way I always used to think of it is that the Union Army, mechanical, industrialized, and materialistic in a bad sense of the word, and then the Confederates, the connotation, that's not that I believe it, but like the stereotype, Confederates are more like spiritual and more like, you know, how do you put it? They're more like, they have just more roots and tradition, and then I
Yeah,
read what LaRouche wrote, and
yeah,
I found it actually inspiring. Like, yeah, they're more religious, which was that the opposite was true. The Union Army
yes,
represents Plato in
yeah,
LaRouche's view, and the Confederates represent the kind of materialistic, in a bad sense, Aristotle. And then he wrote about how the Confederate leaders were the most debauched and degenerate. They would get in drunken orgies, and
yeah,
they had no morals. And it's almost like the Union Army was, despite being the force of industrial modernity, a force of morality, right? And that's a connection that I never really fully made before. I always associated
mhm,
industrial modernity with the kind of like satanic uh, um, bad materialism,
yeah.
and that the old kind of rule is more like spiritual. But LaRouche opened my perspective to these beautiful idea, and I'm kind of an artist first and foremost, so that's why I'm putting it in those terms. Of the Union Army was who represents industrial modernity is like this kind of Platonic uh, force of morality, right? So I really appreciated that way of opening my eyes to history.
I know what you mean. I mean, when you begin to approach history from LaRouche's standpoint, which is possible from the standpoint of physical economics, and you recognize that there is this inherent fight. Like he says that Zeus and Prometheus is not really a myth, or in other words, that the myth is reality. That you had ancient civilizations that were on the coast, and they were seafaring, and they were much more advanced than peoples who were in inland. And when those civilizations came in contact with the inland civilizations, they had a choice, which is that they could enslave them and rape them and kill them, and loot them, or they could say, this is also human. This is a human being, and we will give them the fruit of our science, our knowledge, our culture, and we will, uplift them. And that, you can see that so clearly between Xi Jinping and, the Davos crowd, or anything like that. He gave a speech at Davos just a few days ago where he just put them up against the wall and said, we have to get nations to work together to defeat this pandemic, and we have to actually bring nations up. He made that very clear. Meanwhile, the opposing forces of the IMF and so forth and the Federal Reserve presently, they're taking moves that are going to radically, as the Federal Reserve increases the interest rates, it's going to radically destroy lives across the world if we don't do something about it, if it's not changed. And so you can see it alive today, and if you trace it back, this whole question that you're raising, you'll see it in every civilization, in every culture, especially when you look at the renaissances that increased the capability for humanity to progress. But it's a war. It's a war like it was for Lincoln. We have to flank them. We can't just, you can't take these people on with a frontal assault. You have to figure out how to turn their strength into their weakness. And that's, I know you got to go, so I just want to emphasize that I think that that's why I'm totally focused on this Operation Ibn Sina. It sounds ridiculous to someone who's not really thinking, because they look at the question of Afghanistan and they hear you say, "Oh, I want to save the lives of the people in Afghanistan," and they think that you're some kind of liberal,
No, it makes sense to me. Afghanistan is it's part of Brzezinski's
Right.
chessboard. It has the central geopolitical significance. So yes, it makes a lot of sense to me.
I appreciate that you get that, and then because that's the idea, right? You want a pivot point. You want to figure out some way to change this planetary situation where the Malthusian policy, if we allow it to continue, then that's it. I think that if we don't get the turn, there's no indication from the Biden administration that they're at all capable of dealing with the British push for war. It is British. If you look at the report about a Russian coup in Ukraine, it came from the British. Today, Blinken said after extensive discussion with our allies, he means the British, we decided to send this message back to the Russians. He absolutely does, right? And that Biden doesn't seem to have any ability to respond to that. So we have to cause that to be known to the American public and people around the world.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we will definitely be doing this much, much more regularly. And I'm thinking by more regular, I mean like next week, have another discussion. And
Okay, that sounds good.
and also sorry for postponing it today. It's just Jackson. He had a debate with Sam Cedar, so I had to.
I've been watching since 10. It's been fun. It's been really fun. But
All right.
thanks a lot for having me on. We'll talk soon.
Of course, yeah. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.